Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Net General bringing you a new unit stat comparison for the units we are going to be getting in the upcoming DLC, the Prophet and the Warlock. Over the weekend, Creative Assembly hosted a tournament, the Ever-Chosen Invitational, in which we got to see some of the new units that we're going to get in the DLC. And I thought, let's take a look at some of the stat lines and compare them to some of the stuff we already have in the game. Another thing to note is that I'm just going to be looking at the new units, not the Regiment of Renown unit. If you'd like to see me do a video on the Regiment of Renown we saw over the weekend, do drop something in the comments. I believe they were playing over the weekend on a high setting for unit size, so I've tried to match that up where possible. And also, it should be noted that some of these stats that we saw over the weekend may change in the build-up to the release with some last-minute changes from Creative Assembly. So let's start off looking at the Skaven. And we're going to start off with the Legendary Lords. And of course, the Legendary Lord for the Skaven coming into the game is none other than Ikit Claw, the mad tinkerer of Skavendom. If you're interested in some of his faction traits and stuff, I covered that in an earlier video that should be popping up in the top right-hand corner now, or you'll see a link to the starting position and faction information down in the description below if you're interested in checking that out. Now, Ikit Claw can be on foot, can be on a Doom-flayer, as we know from previous information released, and can be on a Doom wheel. On the whole, Ikit Claw looks great. He can whiz about on his Doom wheel. Now, when we compare Ikit Claw, he is basically a wizard who is kind of hardy. So I tried to think who we can compare him to, and the best kind of match, it's not a perfect match, I admit, I could come up with is maybe Azag the Slaughterer. So if we compare the two of them together, this is both on high settings and both on vanilla as they appear in custom and multiplayer. So no extras taken, but they do all have their spells, I believe. So that's what we're looking at here. As you can see on Azag's card in the top right hand corner, he comes at a cost vanilla without any extras added or taken away at 2,117 coin. Whereas we saw a screen grab of how much Ikit would cost, and he stands at around 2,306. So not too far off each other, a couple of hundred difference in it there. Now, when we compare their hit points, they're very much in a similar range, 3,200 and some change. Armor, a little bit higher for Ikit Claw, understandably. He has a mechanical frame built into his body because he suffered a horrific accident. Speed, Ikit's a little bit faster. Leadership, they're on par, two higher, slightly going to Azag. Melee attack, 60 for Azag. 45 for Ikit. Not as great, but he does have flaming attacks and magic attacks, so when he does hit, they'll potentially do a lot more damage to certain units. Melee defense, 56 to 60, comparable there. Weapon strength, 370 for Ikit, 400 for Azag, so Azag maybe hits a little bit harder and hits a little bit more often, but doesn't have some of the extra traits that Ikit does. And a charge bonus on foot going to Azag, slightly bigger mass behind him there, makes a bit of sense. Now, Ikit Claw will also have access to a warp fire thrower, so a flamethrower, but as they've said over the weekend, it seems to be on a very long cooldown, and that's why his ammunition count is so low. You won't be able to use it that much, but when you do use it, I imagine it'll be pretty devastating, looking at the missile damage he can do there. The range is not huge on it, so you can see, get him close to combat, get him lined up properly, and he can do some devastating damage with his flamethrower there. Now, we also got to see a couple of Ikit Claw's abilities in these battles. The first one being Brass Orb, as you can see here, which is a magical vortex. But an interesting aspect that was mentioned about this is it casts instantaneously, so there's not a lot of opportunity for enemies to get out the way or move. So that seemed like it might be particularly useful. His second skill was Unlimited Power, which greatly increases reserves of magic, as well as his ability recharge rate. Now, he does also have his weapon, I believe Storm Demon, if I'm not mistaken about the name, but we haven't got to see, at least not in the battles I saw, that I remember being able to pull a clip out to show you guys what his weapon traits are. It might just give him a boost to weapon strength or something, but I'm not sure if they were ever picked in multiplayer and they weren't shown to us. So unfortunately, I don't have that one to show you. If it was and I missed it, please someone put it in the comments. That'd be incredibly helpful. Other than that, that is Ikit Claw. So from Ikit Claw, let's move on and have a look at the Ratling Gunners. Now, these guys were picked a couple of times in the battles we saw over the weekend, but there weren't any great shots of them unleashing all hell into enemy units. And we were told that they can be devastating, but not a lot of demonstration shown over the weekend that I caught, at least. But we do get close-ups of them, they look pretty good, and we do have their stat line. So when looking at stuff to compare the Ratling guns to, there's not a lot of stuff in the other armies that compares particularly well for the Ratling gunners. So I figured the closest thing was probably the zombie deck gunners from the Vampire Coast armies. So looking at them compared to the deck gunners, we can see that the deck gunners have a cost of 700. Now on the screen where we saw the Skaven unit costs, we were able to see that the Ratling gunners at the moment were lined up to be costing around 800 or so. So 100 more expensive than the deck gunners. They have the same amount of men in the unit, so they're similar in that way. The Ratling gun team with a few hundred more hit points here. A lot more armor for the Ratling gun team, so a bit more hardy there. Higher leadership as well, which is unusual for a Skaven unit, but that's alright. Speed 38. They can be quite pacey, you know, they can get around. That's not bad speed. I think that's quicker maybe than an Empire States unit. I'm not 100% sure about that. Just an Empire Swordsman unit or something like that. I think that's actually quicker than them. So, able to get away from some stuff. The melee attack, 16-5, but this isn't why you're using your weapon teams. 16 for melee defense compared to the 10 of the deck gunners. So, a bit more resilient overall if they do get caught. Weapon strength, 26 compared to the 18 of the deck gunners. Charge bonus 2 for the rats, 1 for the zombies. Big, huge difference there. And ammunition, this is interesting. The Ratling gunners have less ammunition than the deck guns and far less range. So the range of the Ratling gunners is only 145, whereas the deck gunners is 245. So that's quite a significant difference between the two there, and should give you an idea, sort of not quite half, but just over half of what their range is for the deck gunners is what we're likely to get of the Ratling guns. And the missile damage. Now this is where the Ratling gunners come into their own. 339, and they also have that suppression ability, which gives the unit they're shooting at minus 36 speed, allowing everything else in your army to annihilate it even more on its way to fighting your lovely rats. So that's a huge thing, and I think even that suppression almost by itself pays for the point difference between the two. So a bit of a difference there, you know, less ammo and less range, but far more devastating when they are hitting. Although the deck gunners do have that shield breaker ability, these guys have the suppression ability, which is pretty great as well. Now, just for fun, I thought, you know what, why not let's throw in the other minigun in the Warhammer Fantasy Universe, the Hellblaster Volley Gun, and you can get an idea there. Again, much shorter range than the cannon. It's not a fair comparison, but much shorter range and about half as much missile damage. But still pretty effective, but that should just give you an idea of something to bank it up against. So that's fun. They look like they could be absolutely devastating. Can't wait to get my hands on them and see what they can actually do on a battlefield. Moving on from the Ratling guns, let's go to the Warlock jezzails. The unit I'm most excited for seeing in the battlefield. These guys were picked a lot over the weekend. People used them to devastating effect, particularly the Regiment of Renown version that can stay hidden while they're shooting at you will be devastating against AI. Still pretty good against human players as well from what we saw over the weekend. Now again, I'm still kind of struggling to what to compare these two. So the most immediate comparison to me jumped out at us again as the deck gunners. Now in the pricing we saw for multiplayer, the jezzails are a little bit more expensive than the Ratling gunners. They stand at 900 compared to the 800 for the Ratling gunners and the 700 for the Vampire Coast deck gunners here. So the jezzails have the same amount of health as the Ratling gunners and a few hundred more than the deck gunners here. Again, better armor, and due to their shields at the front with their two-man teams, they have shielded stuff, good missile resistance, and good armor. So they can, if you put them toe-to-toe with something that's also a missile unit, they'll do pretty well. Now that's obviously much higher than the deck gunners from the Vampire Coast, who have no armor virtually, and have a lower leadership than the Warlock jezzails as well. Speed 42, in line with how the rats get about, scurrying wherever they go. Melee attack 16, again, that's on par with the Ratling gunners we saw previously, but better than the deck gunners. Melee defense 25, that's even better, I think, than the Ratling gunners we just had. Weapon strength 26, pretty good. Again, higher than the deck gunners. charge bonus 2 versus the deck gunners 1, ammo 22. So these guys have the same amount of ammunition as the deck gunners, which is good to see. Range 300. So again, 55 more range than the deck gunners. That's impressive. That's some really good range on them, as they should have. People could argue more, less. I could see the argument go both ways, but I'm happy with that 300. I think that's perhaps on par with what we could be expecting. A good amount of range for them. Now, these guys have Shield Breaker, which lowers the missile resistance of the unit they're fighting at, not unlike the deck gunners. I think it's the same thing they both have. And it has armor-piercing missiles as well. So, great little outlay there for the Warp Block jezzails. They look like they can do a lot of work from what we've seen. A really good get for the Skaven army. Moving on from the jezzails, we have, last but by no means least, the Doom-flayers. The melee-focused unit in this new DLC pack for the Skaven. They rampage around the battlefield with their spinning blades, doing all kinds of carnage. So let's take a look at their stats. And in comparing stats, I thought the best unit to compare them against I could find is probably the Gore Beast Chariot for the Chaos. If we compare these two units, we see that the Gore Beast Chariot costs around 1,200 for a multiplayer game, and that's exactly the same price as the Doom-flayers that we saw on the weekend's coverage. They also have the same unit size, are both classified as armored, armor-piercing, and anti-infantry units. Now, in terms of their health, the Gore Beast Chariot has 4,920 compared to the higher Doom-flayers at 5,196. Armor, 100 for the Flayers, a little bit higher for the Gore Beast at 120. Leadership, Gore Beast take that by 10. Speed, 72 for the Doom-flayers, making them pretty handy. The Gore Beasts are a little bit more cumbersome at 66, so they're a bit more nimble to get around the Doom-flayers. The melee attack, 26 for the Doom-flayers, 30 for the Gore Beasts. Comparable, Gore Beasts obviously have the advantage there. Melee defense, 21 against 32. So again, the Gore Beast being a bit more hardy, but having a little bit less life than the Doom-flayers. And weapon strength, 95 compared to the Gore Beast 50. So a lot more dangerous. Maybe don't last as long as the Gore Beast, but have the potential to do a lot more damage to the Gore Beast when in melee combat. Now, the other thing is that the Gore Beasts have a much higher charge bonus of 80 against the Doom-flayers 40, a lot more weight behind those chariot units. And the Doom-flayer might be a little bit harder to hit. It seems like it might have a smaller hitbox than the Gore Beast chariot as well. But overall, like, fairly comparable units. I think the Gore Beast is a bit hardier, a bit slower, whereas the Doom-flayer a bit quicker, a bit more nimble, can do a bit more damage, and I think will be a very handy unit for the Skaven to have. Also, their bonus there with the armor plate was some kind of armor bonus. I apologize, it was a 10-second clip out of many, many hours of coverage, and I couldn't dig out exactly what that was. But I think it is some kind of armor boost for the Doom-flayers. So I apologize for not knowing that one. If you did catch it, please do leave it in the comments below. But there is a potential armor addition that is not necessarily displayed in these stats here for the Doom-flayers. Overall, I think a fair comparison, we can see where they stand up. It's good to have that extra pace. Something with the kind of armored and killing power comparable to a Gore Beast Chariot with a bit more pace on it is great to have in an army. That's about it for the units on the side of the Skaven. We're going to switch over now to the Lizardmen units, and we're going to start with Tehenhauin, the Prophet of Sotek. He arrives in several different forms. We can have him on the Engine of the Gods, as we see here. He can also appear on a Ripperdactyl and, of course, on foot. And it's his stats on foot we're going to be focusing on today, just coming vanilla from the Custom Battles pack, or the multiplayer package there. Now, he is a magic user, but he's classified as sword infantry. So again, I couldn't really think of who to compare him to, and I threw up Azag again, just to see, and you know what, it's not a bad comparison between the two of them. So we're going to stick with Azag like we did with Ikit Claw, and we'll have that cross point of reference as well. So, Tehenhauin is a great character. His cost sits at 1913, vanilla, no changes made. That brings him his spells and such. And we see here that him next to Azag at 2117 is, you know, a fair enough comparison. Azag a little bit more expensive there. Now, armor-wise, they're both very similar, with Azag at 70 and Tehenhauin taking it by 4. And the Prophet has a few less health points, with 3,036 to Azag's 3,297. Leadership, the Prophet of Sotek takes it. Speed, again, the little skink is nimble. Melee attack 55 with poison against 60 without. Melee defense 45, better than Azag. And weapon strength 400, armor piercing, they both have that. Charge bonus, Azag takes that one as well. So all in all, you know, these two aren't dissimilar. I think in a fight with that poison, Tehenhauin would take it. But Azag is not too far off in terms of how they'd probably hold up in a fight in hand-to-hand. Now, obviously, things like magic and such are a little bit harder to quantify, but that's basically how his stats stack up. Now, we did get a look at some of his character bonuses as well. The first of these is Burning Alignment, and what that does is it is a wind spell, and it causes moderate magical damage and fire damage, and that's tied in to his Engine of the Gods, I believe. So that's actually tied into that piece of mount equipment for him if he has that on him. The other one he has for himself as the Lord is the Focus Instinct. I think it's a multiple use for a cooldown of 90 seconds to stop rampage. So if he's around within 40 meters, he can stop rampages to animals around him. Now, some Lords and stuff have Cold-Blooded, which can stop it for, I think, one use per Lord or hero. But this looks like it's multiple uses, and it's an area of effect, so it can stop more than one unit at any given time. So that's handy to have on the battlefield as well. His items themselves, the Blade of the Serpent's Tongue, is a poison area of effect. So all allies within 40 meters of him get a charge bonus and get poisoned. So great for when you're about to launch into attack. Make sure he's lined up with your troops and they go smashing in there with that charge bonus and use that poison, bring down the damage units can do and their speed at the same time. So very handy to have on you there. That 40-meter range, you can really pack him into a blob fighting. That will give huge dividends to you using Tehenhauin. Then you have the Plaque of Sotek. This gives a ward save, but not all the time, I don't believe. It looks like whenever you cast a spell, you get a 22% damage resistance ward save and 12 leadership bonus for 21 seconds. So try and keep casting those spells as long as you can, particularly if you're in the middle of something. Throw down some Flocks of Doom. He has the Lore of Beasts, so he'll be able to do that. That looks like a pretty handy piece of equipment as well. So those are the abilities that Tehenhauin has, and we will move on to some of the units the lizard men are getting with this DLC, and the first one up is the new general we're just going to have a quick look at, and that is the Red-crested skink chief. Now, we never saw this guy in battle over the weekend, but we did get to have a look at his stat lines, and we see them here. Now, we're going to put him up against the Goblin War Boss. They're both wee guys, and they're both melee focused, so I thought that'd be a good matchup. Now, up against the Night Goblin War Boss at a cost of 834 gold versus the Red Skink Chief, who costs 988, we see that the Skink is a little bit more expensive, and they're not a perfect matchup, but you know what, they're good enough for our purposes today. And we see that health-wise, the War Boss is at 2931, a little bit higher than the Red-crested Skink Chief's 2829, and this is both of them coming vanilla, just without any mounts or anything. You can see in the middle here of the screen the mount prices showing for the Red-crested Skink Chief. Looks like he has the Cold One, the Ripperdactyl, and the Engine of the Gods, I'm going to guess that is, or maybe an Ancient Stegodon, I'm not 100% sure. They do have the armor at 25 for the War Boss, armor higher for the Skink Chief, but no shield there, bear in mind, which will be important against missiles. Leadership 60 for the War Boss versus 65 for the Skink Chief. Speed, the Skink Chief is a bit quicker at 46 versus 35. The War Boss has melee attack 45 plus poison. The Skink Chief is at 55 melee attack, no poison. And the melee defense, 53 for the War Boss versus 45 for the Chief. So it looks like the War Boss a little bit more defensive than the Skink Chief. Skink Chief a little bit better at attack. However, when we look at weapon strength, we see that when the War Boss does hit, he hits a lot harder, and he has poison as well. Whereas the Skink Chief is hitting at 340, but he is anti-large and he does have armor piercing as well in there. So those are both huge bonuses to them, as well as the frenzy ability, which could count in certain combat exchanges. Charge bonus, they're both fairly wee, so they're sitting there with a charge bonus of 35. So yeah, not a bad comparison. It gives us an idea of what the Skink Chief is able to do with that armor piercing and the anti-large there. Particularly if you maybe get him on something like a Ripperdactyl or a Cold One, maybe particularly handy there. But an interesting choice for General, so we'll wait to see how they play out. Maybe wait for a bit more gameplay and see how they hold up against other types of General, if there's any room for the Red-crested Skink Chief in the multiplayer meta. Moving on from the Skink Chief, we have the Red-crested Skinks, and these are the new armor-piercing Skinks, and we're going to put them up against the nasty Skulkers. Now, both of these guys are quite small units with armor piercing, so I figured they wouldn't be a bad matchup. The nasty Skulkers, we know, sit at a cost of 500 at the moment before the new patch, and the Red-crested Skinks are going to cost around 550 from what we saw over the weekend. In terms of size, the Skulkers have a few more models in their army, which would mean that the Red-crested Skinks have a bit more health per model as they go about their business. Overall, in terms of the health-wise, it looks like the Skulkers have it by 200 odd points, but, that's explained by the extra models and such. In terms of armor, the Red-crested Skinks have 30 compared to the Skulkers 15. Leadership is much higher amongst the Skinks as well at 62. Speed, again, quicker than a Gobbo. Melee attack 26, on par with the Skulkers, equally matched. Melee defense, 19, a touch bigger than the ones of the Skulkers, and weapon strength, 25, armor piercing. The Skulkers are 24 armor piercing, and charge bonus really on par with each other as well, with 21 for the Skinks and 20 for the Skulkers. Now, the Skulkers have a few more bags of tricks with them, but the Skinks do have Frenzy, which could be particularly helpful when taking down enemy units. So all in all, that's the toss-up there between the Skulkers and the Skinks. I think it was an interesting comparison to make between those two, used in different ways, but both kind of small armor-piercing guys, handier than you probably think they would be initially. So those are the Red-crested Skinks. Moving on, we're going to have a look at the Ancient Salamander. Now, I was most concerned when we first heard about this guy about how he'd fire. Now, we have seen him fire a couple of times over the battles at the weekend. It looks alright. It's sort of assuaged my fears a little bit. Not quite the spray of fire I was thinking when I first expected to see the Salamanders in the lineup, but not bad. And it does do a good, healthy amount of damage I've seen it do, as it fires kind of greeny, slimy fireballs as it goes. But in terms of its statistics, the Ancient Salamander is a single unit that does range damage and isn't bad in a fight, so I figured we'd compare it to units that do similar kind of things, and the first one of those I could think of is perhaps the Bone Giant. Now, up against the Bone Giant, the Salamander is not a bad match. They're both sort of not bad when they get involved in a fight, and they both do missile, and they're both single entities. So let's go through the comparisons. Both of them, obviously, just a single unit. The Bone Giant has a lot more health at 9,465 compared to the 4,528 of the Ancient Salamander. The armor is higher on the Salamander somehow. The Bone Giant is still a construct, but the Salamander has higher armor. It does have that snazzy little helmet, I suppose. And leadership higher on the Salamander as well. Speed much higher. 75 is pretty pacey on the Salamander. Compared to the 32 on the Bone Giant. They're not known for running about. Melee attack 34, flammable. Melee attack on the Giant 30, comparable, but with the flame, that's an extra kick as well. Melee defense 32 versus the Bone Giant's 25. Weapon strength 365 compared to the Bone Giant's 400. A little bit less, but still not bad. On par, both of those armor piercing as well. Charge bonus 40 compared to the Bone Giant's 20. Ammunition, they both sit there on 20. One does magical damage, one does flaming damage, and the range is 150. Less than half of the range of the Bone Giant. So that's interesting. Not great range, but not bad. In the build-up to the announcement of the units, they did say that these guys would maybe be a long-range comparison to the Salamander hunting pack itself. But, it's still not great range, but that's what we've got. The missile damage is 470 compared compared to the 545 of the Bone Giant, but it also makes units more susceptible to flaming damage, and it is armor piercing as well. But the Bone Giant's is too. So really, the missiles arm is great. In combat, it's a little bit better, is basically what it looks like from my perspective, with that higher melee attack, with those flaming attacks. I wasn't quite satisfied with this. I wanted to get a better idea of like where this would place in terms of it being maybe more of a missile-focused single entity. So I'm going to throw up both the Necrofex Colossus and the Hell Cannon when we look at this. Now, its missile damage is higher than the Hell Cannons, so that's something to consider. Not as high as the Necrofex Colossus, and its range is nowhere near either of those two units. Now, this range can maybe be beaten by the fact that it's so quick. At 75, it can just move around and get within range pretty swiftly. So you have to take that into account. But I think it will be a fun and interesting unit, and I look forward to learning how to make the most of the ancient salamanders. On that topic, let's maybe move on to the Salamander Hunting Pack. Now, this is the larger unit of Salamander Hunters, and we're going to compare them to, I think, the first thing we probably need to is maybe the Iron Drakes. Two very different things, but as far as their missiles at least are concerned, not completely incomparable. So let's start with that. Now, the Iron Drakes have a 21-man squad compared to the Salamander Hunting Pack's 24. Their Salamanders were 3,120 health compared to the 2,688 of the Iron Drakes. Leadership is higher with the Dwarves, as one might expect. Speed, obviously, with the Salamanders at 70. Not as pacey as the Ancient model, but pretty pacey nonetheless. Melee attack 25 flaming, melee attack for the Iron Drakes is 20, melee defense 22 compared to the Iron Drakes 27, weapon strength 47 armor piercing compared to the Iron Drakes 20, charge bonus 28 compared to 6, ammo 20 compared to 25 for the Iron Drakes, and range 90 compared to the Iron Drakes 80. So a little bit better, but this is where the Iron Drakes make up for it with their 163 missile damage, compared to the only 80 missile damage from the Salamander Hunting Pack. In terms of how the Salamander Hunting Pack actually fires its missiles, I don't know. I wasn't able to catch it during the stream. It might have happened in the corner of a battle somewhere, but I did not manage to see it. I'm sure we'll see it in the next couple of days, but I don't know if they will fire exactly the same way the Iron Drakes do, or it'll be firing much more like the Ancient Salamander. We'll have to wait and see. I imagine probably more like the Ancient Salamander, so clearing a bit more clearance, a bit more range, a bit more of an arc than the Iron Drakes perhaps have. I wanted to throw in another maybe monstrous animal missile-focused unit just to throw it in there to compare it, and so I'm going to put up the Rotting Promethean Gunnery Mob. Now, I know these guys fire bullets and the like, and it probably perhaps won't be the same. They probably won't get as much splash damage as the Salamander Hunting Pack, but I just wanted to pull them up to see where they stand against each other. Missile damage much higher for the Salamander Hunting Pack, but the range is similar. So the range of the Rotting Promethean Gunnery Mob will be the same as the range of the Salamander Hunting Pack. Ammunition, the Prometheans have a bit more. Weapon strength is higher amongst the Prometheans. Armor's higher. Health is higher. So a bit more durable in the terms of a fight, the Prometheans, but the Salamanders maybe have it better as a missile. So maybe the Salamanders sit somewhere really in between these two units, with the Rotting Prometheans being better in melee close combat and the Salamanders being better than them at missiles, whereas the Iron Drakes are better at missiles than the Salamanders, but the Salamanders are better at close combat. Now, with the Hunting Pack of the Salamanders and the Ancient Salamanders, I didn't get a chance to glimpse the cost of those units, so we don't know really where they fit on that scale as of yet, but we do at least have an idea of their stats for now. Next up, we have the Ripperdactyls. The Lizardmen finally have a melee answer in the air. Pterodons were never that threatening. It's good to have these boys up and fighting, and we got some decent stats on the Ripperdactyls. Now, when we are looking at the Ripperdactyls, I wanted to compare them to other things that are in the air, but maybe not top-tier air fighters like the Hippogriffs. So we've gone for the standard Pegasus Knights and the Vargeist to compare the Ripperdactyls to today. And if we look at them, few key differences, and we're going to start with the unit sizes. So, as I said earlier, I have tried to match these up with the high unit size that it seemed like they were playing with this weekend, and we have the Pegasus Knights sitting at 18 and the Vargeist at 12, but the Ripperdactyls only sitting at 8. but they're not completely out of touch when it comes to hit points. The Ripperdactyls at 4,224, Pegasus Knights at 4,518, and the Vargeis at 4,740. Now, that would seem to suggest that the Ripperdactyl per model have a lot more health than either of the other two units, which is interesting in its own right. Moving down the list, armor. It's not as heavily armored as the Pegasus Knights. They obviously have their shields as well, but it has a lot more armor than the Vargeis, who have 10, and the Ripperdactyls have 45. Leadership, 65, less than the Pegasus Knights, more than the Vargeis. Speed, 90. Actually the slowest of all of them, which could be a bit annoying just in terms of trying to hunt down the Pegasus Knights or the Vargeis. Melee attack, 44. That is the highest of all of them, with the Pegasus Knights at 32 and the Vargeis at 40. The melee defense, 22, the lowest of all of them, with the Pegasus Knights at 26 and the Vargeis at 24. Weapon strength, this is where they really start to shine. 130 anti-infantry bonus, armor piercing, and they have frenzy as well. Whereas the Pegasus have anti-large, but they sit at 56 weapon strength, and the Vargeis with no extras just sit at 100, but they also have frenzy. Really, these guys are most effective coming down, quickly wiping down units of archers, units of any kind of missile units you have. You really want to maybe take these guys on in the air. It would be an interesting matchup in the air with any one of these. And the charge bonus of 52 is exactly the same as the Pegasus Knights, much higher than the 22 of the Vargeis. So overall, I think it would be an interesting test just to put the Pegasus Knights and the Ripperdactyls up against each other in a straight-up fight. With the more models, with the anti-large, I think the Pegasus Knights might take it. I don't know about that, actually, with that high weapon strength as well. It's just so much higher than the Pegasus Knights. It'd be a bit of a toss-up, but they really are up there with these guys, maybe a little bit better in a combined element than both. So can't wait to get my hands on the Ripperdactyls. These guys, perhaps more than the other units, will really change the dynamic of the tools available to the Lizardmen. It really allows you to do some extra stuff, even in campaign, let alone multiplayer. So that's about it for the Ripperdactyls, guys. We're moving on to a couple of units I can't really compare to anything, so we're just going to have a quick look at them and what they can do. And those are, firstly, the Ark of Sotek. Now, we got a chance to see the Ark of Sotek over the weekend. I think it's a beautifully rendered model with the skinks on the back. And the ability it has over other Bastiladons is the Ark of Sotek itself, which produces snakes to appear out of the ground, as you can see here. Does minor damage, weak against armor, good against large groups. And we see the effect going off right here with all these ethereal-looking snakes on the ground, if you pay attention down there. And that's just poisoning that whole group of enemies that you have in front of. Next up, we have the Engine of the Gods, which we see here. Lovely bit of kit, looking fantastic. I think it's wonderfully rendered on the back of the Ancient Stegodon. It has the Portent of Warding, which means it will give a 5% damage resistance to anything around it. Also Arcane Configuration, which allows a higher power recharge rate. And of course, what we looked at with Sotek earlier, Burning Alignment, its power attack. And we got to see that a few times in all its glorious beauty during the battles over the weekend. It really is a sight to behold, crashing down upon the enemies and doing a lot of damage. And looking fantastic, a big just beam of devastation coming from the sky. But moving on from the Engine of the Gods, last but by no means least, we didn't see his stats, but we saw him in action, Lord Kroak. The animators did a wonderful thing with him. Now, he is dead, so the body cannot move, but what they ended up doing was giving him his spells, the Deliverance of Itza, which we're about to see, but his spirit emerges from the ether to just cast it, and it does damage. It's an area of effect spell, but it only hits enemies. So even if you're in a big blob, it won't do any damage to your units, and that is a fantastic bonus to have, and a very devastating weapon as you see it go off another time in the battlefield here. Now, I think the animators did a great job of animating his floating spirit. Look at it, just a big floating toad above the battlefield. Just wonderfully done, really, in my book. And he's looking great. on the battlefield, taking on a Hell Pit Abomination here. I think they did a really wonderful job animating his attacks, animating his deliverance of Itza, and we'll get a stat line for him eventually, but I didn't want you guys to miss out on all the hot Kroak action as we saw it over the weekend. And this is his shielding spell he's doing there, I think, as the deliverance of Itza goes off within the bubble. But really, that's about it. That is the units we have coming up and how they compare against some of the units that already existed in the game. I hope you guys enjoyed that look. If you'd like me to take a closer look at the Regiments of Renown, let me know in the comments. But other than that, guys, as always, a huge thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Alright, guys, bye.